The most familiar image of South Africa today is one etched in violence. But South Africa is a land of enormous complexity, a land of many different faces. It is a land where some 5 million whites rule over more than 24 million blacks. They do it through the legally sanctioned system of segregation known as apartheid. This program looks at South Africa through the eyes of those who know it best, apartheid's people. I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault. Last fall, I spent a month in South Africa with a production team to prepare a series of reports for the MacNeil-era NewsHour. Our goal was to find out what everyday life is like for the people who live there. What we found were some extraordinary individuals struggling to come to terms, each in a different way, with apartheid. Not much has changed in South Africa since we were there. The government has severely restricted media coverage in some of the areas we visited. The official body count has gone up as blacks and whites have been caught in repeated outbreaks of violence. It now stands at over 1,100 killed, most of them black, since the government imposed a state of emergency last July. But for the people you are about to meet, life goes on pretty much as it did when we first encountered them. Our journey began in Johannesburg, South Africa's largest and richest city. From there, we headed for the black township of Kwatema, 25 miles to the southeast. Kwatema doesn't appear on the official government maps of South Africa. Like all black townships, it is a satellite of an all-white town, in this case, the town of Springs. Kwatema is a dusty, sprawling place, home to more than 100,000 men, women, and children, on the streets from early morning, going about their daily routines. Those routines vary. Unemployment is high, and many of the men are idle. Maintaining stable family life can be extremely difficult. This is Christo Nkosi, Kwatema's Catholic Church, and this is Sister Agatha. Sister Agatha is a 51-year-old Dominican nun who has been living and working in Kwatema for the past 3 years.
When I first came to Kwatema, I was more than shocked. The filth that was mounting on every corner in the streets was unbelievable. And to me, it was a sign of people who were debased by what people normally term the system. And the system, by the word system, is implied apartheid. This has reduced people to the level base of being, at least the majority. We are nothing. And because we are nothing, then presumably we act as nothing.
The parish priest of Kwatema's Catholic community is an Afrikaner. His name is Father Peter Hortop. Most Afrikaners have never been inside a township. Father Peter is different.
My people in Kwatema are all black people. I don't see the color black. For me, they are people. Beautiful people. And once they know a person, they also don't see the color white. They accepted me right from the beginning. And I loved them right from the beginning. Life for me personally is very difficult because apartheid for me is one of the greatest evils, the greatest evil in my country, South Africa.
It is apartheid that has led to the violent uprisings in places like Guatemala. The police and the army have waged a brutal campaign over the past 6 months, much of it directed at the children. The police have justified their actions, saying they are merely trying to contain wanton violence. They fired rubber bullets and tear gas at random. Sometimes their targets eluded them. Other times the smallest children were the victims of the attacks.
Basically, I'm against violence. I don't entertain violence against anybody whatsoever. But sometimes people are pushed into that. And having perhaps tried in the past to be patient, time has run out and it seems there's nothing we can do to stop, especially the young people, from being violent.
For more than 6 months, mixed patrols of army and police marched down the streets of Guatemala looking for children. During that period, the children were boycotting their schools. The government responded with a get tough approach. Anybody caught out of school without permission was running a risk. But the students stood firm. When we spoke with them before the boycott ended, they explained why they weren't in school.
It's not because we don't want to go to school. We do want to go to school. The only problem is that we're not having equal education with the South African whites. So there's a vast difference between South African whites' education and South African blacks' education.
What's unequal about it?
For instance, if I take the syllabus for the whites, it's much more advanced than the black syllabus. For instance, science. We don't have any computer science at our black schools. They are having computer science.
We now know what is good and what is not good.
And you're not...
Yes, we don't want a meaningless kind of education. We don't want that.
They feel that the education which is given to them is half a loaf, as I said, I think, sometime back. And this is only making them better slaves later on. They don't want halves or quarters. They want a perfectly full loaf.
Widespread student demonstrations continued until last month when students voluntarily decided to return to school. But before that, the police tried to force them back, and Father Peter remembers what happened.
About a dozen policemen were alleged to have gone into the classrooms and beat up the children for no reason at all, and they couldn't understand this. Really beat them up.
Now, when they told you these stories, did you believe them?
I've got absolutely no doubt that they were speaking the truth. And it suddenly struck me. You see, I'm a South African. I've been here for about 56 years. And it was the old South African way. I've been brought up in it. The only thing that these people understand is the strong arm of the law. Really, beat them up. Then they will do what they're supposed to do.
There was ample evidence of the beatings. These were the lucky ones. Some were worse off and ended up in the hospital. The authorities defended the police action, then clamped a lid of silence on the incident. After that, the students were rounded up and once again forced back to school under heavy guard. The children were not the only ones beaten by the police. There was also trouble on Sister Agatha's street. Her friend Teresa Nguni was involved. Teresa owns a shebeen, an unlicensed bar. It is one of the most popular places in Guatemala. Shebeens are illegal, but since they are the only private places where people in townships can gather and have a good time, there is usually no trouble with the authorities. That is why the police actions on one Saturday night stunned Teresa's patrons.
Come, police, inside in the house, hands up. Everybody, hands up. They search us, our pockets, everybody's pockets. They search everybody. From there, they took whatever they've got in your pocket, they take it. Money, people, knife, whatever it is, they take it. From there, they shambok us. That's what I remember on the 3rd. And shambok us, all of us. And my husband, they have to shambok my husband to that extent. They've affected my husband's eye. They beat us to death. We reached the police station. There was a white man, 2 white men. They say, no, don't charge these people. They've done nothing. So even if you charge them, what are you going to charge them? Because you have beaten them, and that's out of law.
Teresa was not charged with anything either, but of all those so brutally attacked that night, she was singled out for the worst beating.
I think it could happen to me as well. I'm not really myself. If it happened to Teresa, why should it be different to me? It could happen to me as well. I think so.
More than 32 people have been killed in Guatemala by the state security forces in the past 6 months. Here, as elsewhere, most funerals become political events. Walking through the graveyard at Guatemala's edge, Sister Agatha told me about one funeral that she says partly explains why they get so politically charged.
Right away now, as we are in the cemetery, it looks empty and, can I say, desolate. But on that particular day of the funeral, it was quite different. The whole cemetery was simply teeming with people who had attended the funerals. In fact, there is that little hillock that is over there, which was also packed, and more were still coming in. Some of us didn't even manage to get into the cemetery. Soldiers were there. Police cars, vehicles of all sorts were there. As the procession was coming towards the graveyard, a group of some young people ranging 12, 14, 16 broke off from the procession and headed towards the place where the soldiers were. They went wild. To them, it was a challenge. Part of the group broke off, caught a young man, regarded as an informer, beat him up thoroughly, and that's when Father Peter Hotop dashed outside of the group where we were, got into this group, tried his level best to keep them apart, and by that time, the men had been thoroughly walloped.
Let's get out now very quickly, okay? Yeah.
The presence of the state security forces and their agents continues to add to the volatility of the townships. The end may not be in sight, but Father Peter thinks he sees in the state's actions clear signals about the future.
Personally, I don't think they'll change. And I think eventually, I think they've lost already. They have lost. Because the country is ungovernable at the moment. You know, if it's not Guatemala, it's the Cisco. If it's not the Cisco, it's Pretoria. If it's not Pretoria, it's Durban. All over the country. And whereas we had riots in 1956 and 1960, and again in 1969, in 1976, they were able to contain it. This time, they can't contain it. And I don't think they ever will. The change has really started, and the black people are going to rule.
That's Father Peter's vision of the future. But today's reality is that blacks who are denied the right to vote in South Africa have no real power, and the vast majority must struggle to survive. For some, the struggle has produced a certain amount of economic success. That success is usually achieved by living and working in two different worlds, as we discovered when we visited Soweto, the giant black satellite of Johannesburg itself. At dawn, the day begins for the first wave of black workers, the maids, nannies, tea servers, chauffeurs, and others who serve the white city of Johannesburg. About an hour later comes the second wave, people who make up the small but growing black middle class. People like 35-year-old writer Mtutu Matshoba. He joins secretaries, journalists, oil industry executives, managers, and others who don't have to get to work quite so early. Some 350,000 of Soweto's 2 million residents make this journey. No matter their status, they all end up in the same white place.
It's like living one world and going over to another one. I have to prepare myself mentally for a work situation where I meet completely different people than those with whom I stay in the township. I see this dual way of life as a challenge to me because it gives me an opportunity to prove myself in the so-called white world. Johannesburg is really a white man's place in the mind of a black person. It's a place of work. It's a place of exploitation, I'd say, more than a place that they go smilingly to.
Johannesburg is also called Igoli, the Zulu word for gold. But for most blacks, there is little gold here. Their average wage is about $100 a month. They perform essential services. Without them, Johannesburg would come to a halt. But the government only allows non-whites to work here, not to live here or in any other white city. In fact, blacks are required by law to carry special passes that restrict where they can live and work. Blacks must always have on their person what they call the Dom Pass. When Mtutu Matshoba leaves the train, a special bus brings him to this American-based multinational advertising company. This is where Matshoba works. It is here that he earns his living as an executive, a specialist in selling to the black consumer market. Like most businesses in South Africa, this company has not escaped the economic crisis that's gripping the country, a crisis exacerbated by international pressure on the government to do something about apartheid. In South Africa, economics and politics are forced to mix, although it is such a sensitive issue for American-based companies that we were allowed inside this one only on condition that the company remain anonymous. It is 9:15 in the morning, and Matshoba attends his first meeting of the day, called by the marketing director. The company is launching a new television campaign aimed at increasing sales of a milk product to black consumers.
It's a very important thing in African tradition.
Matshoba has overall responsibility to see it through all phases of production, especially getting the right sales pitch.
But this particular one, we say this product as in Komazi. That actually means a milk cow. So what we should do is to take this cow, make it alive, take it back onto a traditional base, and then put it in a modern setting. I'm more conscious of being black at times because the role that I play at work could be briefly described as a black communications consultant. So I have to remain as black as possible so that I can impart an insight into the market that they are dealing with.
That spirit of enlightened self-interest has helped propel Matshoba into middle management. Today, he earns about $9,000 a year, although his white counterpart earns roughly twice that. The disparity is not the only thing that disturbs Matshoba.
When I'm at work, I have to shed off my real self and be the person that's nice to his colleagues, that's trying to establish a relationship of cooperation so that we can produce the best possible work, with our different outlooks towards life in general.
The company subscribes to the Sullivan Principles, a voluntary code of conduct for American-based companies doing business in South Africa. It calls for desegregation in the workplace and black advancement into management. Still, although the code has been in place for 9 years, 95% of the managers in such companies are white. And it is this white world that Matshoba is constantly struggling to cope with.
Sometimes you feel that people try too hard to be nice, and it doesn't come across naturally. And, I tend to do the same as well, consciously try to be as nice as possible, because I'm aware that we are almost from two different worlds.
There's a lovely sign we saw in the butcher shop. It was Watership Down rabbits for sale. You've read the book, you've seen the movie, now eat the cast.
We do try to get together on this social level. In our background, they invite me to their places, but mostly I don't go because I feel that I'm not going to be happy, in the sense I'll be doing it to please them, or they may be doing it to please me or their friends. I do have friends who have visited, and why I welcomed them is that they just came because they wanted to they wanted to come. They didn't want to, impress me or what. They just wanted the experience for themselves. So it was easier to handle such people than people who go there just to satisfy their curiosity and go back into the suburbs and tell how they've been in Soweto and how liberal they are because they have black friends and sort of thing. As long as it always gets us back to the perceptions of black and white. So as long as they think they've been to a different world, then that's not the thing for me.
There is another difference between you and your white colleagues in that you have to carry a pass everywhere you go. How do you feel about that?
It is an insult. The fact that I have to carry a pass wherever I go is an insult to me. If I'm arrested for a pass on my way to work, the people I work with, my bosses, when I don't turn up at work, and they want to know why, because you always have to have them to come and represent you, say that you're working for them and all that, so that you can be released. Now, that gives them an insight into the black man's way of life. And in a way, it educates them. So that is why I don't mind. It's an opportunity to educate the people that I live with, that it all is not so normal as it seems, simply because we work together, we smile together, and when I reverse the process at the end of the day, I'm looking forward to being with my family again. I start relaxing. But there's always a very depressing feeling that I have living white suburbia with all its modern environment and going into the ghetto. And when you get to Soweto, you can see the smog, the dust, the dirt, the listlessness of the people going around without anything to do.
It's 6:30 p.m., Soweto's Mzimskwapi station. It's the end of the day and the end of the line for Mtutu Matshoba. Matshoba's wife, Mandisha, usually arrives home earlier than her husband. She is a school teacher. Like most wives in Soweto, as one job ends, another begins. At home, she has to be an expert organizer, figuring out how to share the space in the kitchen as well as in the rest of the house with their 2 children, Matshoba's mother, and assorted relatives and visitors. There is no dining room, so meals are informal affairs, with people eating in the living room in shifts. This is not unusual in Soweto, where there is never enough housing to go around.
Firstly, the houses are too small for everybody to get into the house and actually relax. So they tend to be out on the streets, strolling about, seeing friends. And during the day, there's so many people in the streets, mainly because there are no jobs. I mean, the economic times that we live in have actually driven many people back into the streets, which has caused an increase in the size of the informal sector as people try to make ends meet by selling little tidbits and all that. People are getting very impatient, and they're getting to the extent where they are prepared to die for their aspirations. They've become so distressed and frustrated that anything goes for them. And I think the causes, the blame lies more with the people that have the gun. I don't see myself as being, as helping white business to exploit the black market or black community to learn. I'm actually learning from them. I'm learning the nitty-gritties of business, which I hope if things, get better, I can impart over to my fellow blacks or help with them. I'm gaining the experience that has been withheld from blacks for a long time. I'm finding a way of getting in there, getting it, proving that we can do it, bringing it back to blacks and actually doing it with them.
And so Mtutu Matshoba remains, like most of his black countrymen, caught between conflicting emotions of hope and despair. Life goes on, but it is overcast with uncertainty. And, like most of his countrymen, Matshoba is worried about the future, his country's, his children's.
When I look at my children, I have hopes and fears. Hopes that they will be allowed to grow up safely in an atmosphere that will allow them to be broad-minded. But my fear springs from the violent atmosphere that is now a part of their daily lives. I worry that they may be lost in the reactionary turbulence that may flow from that.
Our next stop was the black township of Leandra, a satellite of all-white Secunda. There we met a man who is determined to take an active part in shaping the future for all blacks, but particularly for black workers, the people who fuel South Africa's economy. This chant, Amandla Ngwe Tu, is Zulu for power to the people, the rallying cry in this room full of black miners. This reception in a black township is for their leader, Cyril Ramaphosa. He has almost single-handedly put their fight for equality in the mines into the headlines and into public consciousness. Tonight, Zulus and Swanas and Xhosas all speak with one voice, a battle cry.
We are denied many rights. We denied the right to belong to political parties, the right to vote. We don't even have the right to live wherever we wish to. We don't even have the right to work wherever we want to work. The very existence of unions in this country has to address the whole question of apartheid. We're trying to achieve a number of things. One is to recruit members into the union, and for those who have already joined the union, to raise their level of consciousness, to make them see the union as not only an organization that will fight for better wages and better working conditions, but that it's an organization that wants to do more.
It was during his childhood in the black township of Western Native that Ramaphosa's own consciousness-raising began. It was the 60s, at the start of a new phase of black protests, of violent, often fatal clashes with the police, and then as now, another state of emergency.
I was walking to school, and there were soldiers all over the place in the township. And I remember I was still a small boy, and I had to find my way in between the legs of the soldiers with their huge heavy boots and sort of holding their guns. And I remember one point where I had to running away from a soldier, and I was blocked. My way was blocked, and when that happened, I was slapped by one soldier and I fell down. I did not understand most of the things then, but I knew one thing, that a white man was no friend of a black man.
Later, Ramaphosa found safety and comfort in this home in Soweto, where he lived with his family, his father a policeman, his mother a tea server in a white business office. Early on, she noticed something unusual about her son.
He used to tell other children to do this and this and this and this. Now, I didn't take it care when he starts, but at the middle, when he's just growing up, I look at it. I say, but what is going to be this child? I didn't know. I just think for myself, and I didn't tell the father. I just see by the way he plays. He used to tell other children, go and do this, and you must do this, and you must do this. You come and show it to me.
The qualities his mother spotted were later manifested in college, when Ramaphosa became leader of the now banned South African Students' Organization. He was sent to jail for his activities.
I stayed in that cell for a full 11 months. They only allowed my parents to come and see me after 4 months of detention. And I was interrogated almost every day for those first 4 months. There were moments of brutal harassment from the police. All those things just led to further bitterness in me, because I reckon that if they are able to do this to me, who was a student who had not carried any arms and had not tried to overthrow the government violently, they would do a lot worse to people who had tried to overthrow the government violently. And I became very bitter, and I did not care at that point what happened to me.
But Ramaphosa overcame such feelings and went on to earn a law degree. Unsatisfied with law, however, this grandson of a diamond mine worker was lured to the union movement. Although he has never worked in a mine, he is now a pivotal leader.
not only of the nation's largest single union, the National Union of Mines, but he is also a key player in a newly organized federation, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, with some 32 trade unions and 500,000 members. Black miners from the beginning have formed the backbone of South Africa's mining industry, especially the gold fields, among the richest in the world. But apartheid law has long stood in the way of any significant black advancement, always restricting skilled work to white miners only. Without the blasting certificate the law permits only whites to acquire, blacks technically are not even miners. And yet they perform almost every mining function, including blasting, and many others that whites consider either beneath them or too dangerous.
The industry has refused to be more enlightened, has refused to do away with racial discrimination, has actually encouraged the apartheid system in the work situation.
Gold mining offers you a wide range of interesting work with good wages and a chance to train for a top job if you want to get ahead.
The industry obviously sees it differently. In this recruiting film, they paint a much rosier picture in the story of a miner they call Reuben.
Very much. And mining was now as good as any factory job. And better still, the wages would now be reviewed regularly. He had sent money home to his wife every month and still had been able to save half his wages. On the mines, he told them, you can save most of your wages because the food is free and you can eat as much as you like and as often as you want.
Black mine wages have in fact increased dramatically over the last 12 years. Still, average wages this past year amounted to about $200 a month, 1/6 of what white miners make.
Also, the housing is free and you can choose the room you want to stay in so you can live with your friends and people from your own area. Best of all, twice a week you get a free issue of beer.
The film emphasizes the need for better black-white relations. Still, there is racial violence in the mines, and Ramaphosa is proud of the way his union has handled it.
Yeah, the situation occurred on one mine where our members were complaining that the white miners were assaulting them underground. And our advice to them was they should hit back. And when they do hit back, they should hit back as hard as they can. And if they can't win, they should get the assistance of other black miners and hit back against the white miners until the violence stops altogether from the white miners. And that strategy worked.
The strategy of organizing for change is a different proposition in South Africa, as we found out when we went on an organizing trip with Ramaphosa and 2 union officials. They travel as much as 1,200 miles a week, crisscrossing a country 3 times the size of California, usually by car.
The workers in that area work for one of the most conservative mining companies. We're not allowed to hold meetings on mine property. We are not allowed to distribute pamphlets. We're not allowed to get into the hostel. Our organizer has been intimidated on a number of occasions by security police who work hand in hand with the mine management. I constantly fear that the police might come anytime into the office when I'm alone, especially when I'm working late until say 11 or 12 at night. I've been stopped a number of times on the road, and as soon as the police found out who I was, I usually spend a lot of time being interrogated on the road and the car being searched from bumper to bumper.
Are there places along the way where you can stop and refresh yourself or go to the bathroom? I mean, how do you deal with that?
This is South Africa, and in every little town where a black man travels, you always find signs that say whites only, blacks not allowed, or something like that. Even if I take a 12-hour road trip I often find that there aren't many places where I can actually stop and refresh myself and have a wash or anything like that, let alone sitting down and having a meal in most of the smaller towns through which I have to travel.
It was early morning when we arrived on the outskirts of the white mining town near the organizing meeting, Kimberley, next door to its famous diamond mine.
Kimberley is a very conservative Afrikaner town. They do not serve black people in their restaurants. And we have a problem about where we're going to have breakfast.
After driving around for almost an hour, past restaurants that don't serve blacks, we ended up here at this roadside takeout on the edge of Kimberley. This place was not a problem because the group could be served without being seated. The leaders say it is the kind of problem that fuels their drive for black equality in the mines. The meeting was conducted in two languages, Zulu and Swana. I was told that the leadership was railing against State President P.W. Botha and white mining bosses.
Policy-wise, we would not see our union trying to take any form of action against whites per se, but against the government. Now, the problem is the government is white. And because the government is white, even the slogans will be directed against the white government, the white P.W. Botha. And that it will also be directed against the white boss at work. So, because mining is the hub of racial discrimination, we have to use that strategy to conscientize our members. The union movement holds out a promise of change in that you organize workers, and once you've organized them, they take their life into their own hands. And having done that, they're able to use their own force as a group of workers to demand from the management changes that they want to see happening on the mine. And as soon as they realize that they are powerful and they can bring about changes, be it changes on working conditions, be it changes on their wages, they start using that power for issues that involve, say, the wider society. The type of change that I'd like to see taking place in the country is where everybody, all workers, are going to be free and enjoy the rights that any ordinary person ought to enjoy under a free government.
Like blacks throughout South Africa, black miners are excited about the prospect of change. Their victories, however limited, have bolstered their confidence in Ramaphosa. They are eager to follow him into economic and political battlefields, where no other legal black opposition exists. Even mining industry officials acknowledge that Ramaphosa has built an impressive base, disciplined, democratic, and potentially powerful. It is they who say that Ramaphosa is a post-apartheid man. Increasingly, as we traveled around South Africa, we found people talking about what life would be like post-apartheid. Even Afrikaners, the descendants of the original white settlers in South Africa. They are responsible for creating and maintaining apartheid for the past 37 years. Afrikaners control South Africa's government, although they make up only about 9% of the population. To get some insight into their thinking, we journeyed thousands of miles down to the Eastern Cape region. From Cape Town, we headed to a small white farming village near the turbulent black township in Mbekweni.
Here in Paarl, we met Afrikaners who agree that apartheid is outdated and that political change is in the air.
Heavenly Father, for what we are about to receive, make us truly thankful. Amen.
Good food and good fellowship, the Afrikaner prescription for how to end a busy week. On this Friday night in the small village of Paarl, Yanni LaRue, his family and friends are carrying on a tradition that goes as far back as the time when their Huguenot ancestors settled here after fleeing religious persecution in Europe.
My family came to South Africa in 1688. I came from France, from the town of Vendôme, and that's why the farm's name is still Vendôme. And I'm actually the 9th generation still farming on the same farm.
And still having the same fun, like this outdoor barbecue they call a braai.
This is a baked sweet, yeah. It's a sweet potato baked in an oven.
But you call it a mouse?
No, that was only a joke. Boer's sausage, no? The Afrikaner vlees.
LaRue and his wife Ingrid and their 3 children are like many Afrikaner families living in South Africa today, in a kind of uneasy comfort.
I don't think we, my neighbors and my friends, live in fear, but we are worried about our country. The whole Republic of South Africa's image aboard, and we are worried about violence.
Theirs is a violent history. But Afrikaners like LaRue feel strongly about transmitting that history to their children, sending them to groups like these Voortrekkers, similar to American Scouts, only Voortrekker membership is restricted to Afrikaners. This exclusivity is a part of their culture. Their history is found in this lager, a monument to the Afrikaners' great trek into the interior, away from black Africans, away from British oppression. It was there that they fled to set up their own way of life and to defend it at all costs.
We believe that the Afrikaner has a right to stay here. It's part and parcel of the country. Being here for 9, 10, 11 generations, 6 and 1652, he's got no family abroad. He's got nowhere else to go. And there's no thought of going away here.
And that is the lesson the Afrikaner passes on to his children. The white tribe of Africa has determined that their history lies here on land like this, Vendôme, LaRue's home. It is here that LaRue works his land, some 200 acres, producing food for export. The land is fertile. Most of the country's wine grapes are grown in this soil.
We feel this is our soil, but we also feel that this soil and this country is shared by other people, which also has a right on this land, in this country.
The others share only the work, sometimes earning on other farms as little as $3 a week, rarely more than 20, supplemented by free housing, clothing, and sometimes a bonus at the end of the year. From generation to generation, changes have been slow in coming.
The farm to me is important in the economic sense, in the sense that our family lives from it. But it also has other aspects in the sense that it belongs to us for 9 generations. I think the attitude towards ground and this farm specifically have changed from a way of life. It's a plain business operation today.
In LaRue's business, he employs some 22 families, mostly men, sometimes their wives and older children. He says he and his workers have a good relationship, but there are differences.
I think there's a difference in civilization. There's a different level in education. I think that many of the other population groups hasn't got the Western standards, because South Africa is part of the first world and part of the third world. And I don't think that we should force on them first world standards. People don't always understand that.
The tradition that is developed out of that is farmers like LaRue take care of their workers' needs wherever they are. In fact, he is more liberal than the local colored minister, who visited with a complaint that the community center LaRue built for his workers was now being used as a discotheque. The minister thought it too frivolous. LaRue argued that they should be able to make their own decisions.
I'm committed to change. There's no doubt that we are changing. I think the old apartheid system as we had in the past, we are dismantling it. It is dead, and the process is ongoing.
The economic center of LaRue's universe lies not as much in his farm as here at KWV, the 68-year-old Wine Growers Association of South Africa. The wine industry, like many other industries here, is suffering because of the general state of the economy and because of world boycotts of the country's products. It is a sore spot among all sectors in South Africa, and like businessmen all over the country, the members of this co-op are preoccupied with South Africa's political and economic future. They are also worried about sharing power with the country's black majority, which outnumbers whites almost 5 to 1.
You know, everybody is pushing for change, and that whatever change we have, that should contribute towards stability.
I think that our biggest fear for sharing power in the sense of one man, one vote, in a unitary state, is the track record of Africa, where minorities have no chance to survive.
By minorities, you mean?
Minority groups.
Whites?
Whites and other.
How do you feel about the grievances that non-whites have articulated, that there is injustice for them in this country now that is just not being addressed?
I feel there are grievances. I think that those grievances are being looked to, but obviously not at the pace as those people feel it should go. I feel a major factor in this is the economic side of it. It costs money to get all people level in South Africa.
Meanwhile, there are no white institutions in South Africa, not even the church, where black people can freely participate as equals. Most Afrikaners like Yanni LaRue and his family belong to the Dutch Reformed Church.
I think the church is very important for myself and for me as a family. We go to church every Sunday, our children to Sunday schools, and we believe that before God, everyone is equal.
But LaRue's church has always been racially divided into 3 levels: blacks, whites, and coloreds. I asked him why that was necessary in the first place.
That was in the times of the missionaries, actually. The people were lower educated, the people were lower civilized, but being brought up to the same level of civilization, brought up to the same level of education, I feel that the need for structural differences isn't there anymore.
But those differences remain. There is a raging debate within the Dutch Reformed Church over how to resolve the problem, even if people like Yanni LaRue seem prepared to change. These divisions in the church still exist, as do the violent divisions in the rest of the country.
I'm not particularly worried that this violence will spill over to our part of the country, especially not our town and our immediate surroundings, because I think that the people understand each other much better in this part of the world. But it deeply concerns me if people get killed and if buildings are burnt down. A man's life, I think, is the most important thing in the world, and that should be protected at any price, any time.
Afrikaners like Yanni LaRue believe that change will come, but not through violence.
a revolution of the heart and of the mind. This is probably the most important thing in South Africa.
And so we came to the end of our journey inside South Africa. The situation is so volatile that we cannot predict what might happen next. What we can say with certainty is that there are no clear lines of communication between the people in the black townships and the people in the white towns. Everywhere we went, people wanted to know what we had seen elsewhere, what we had heard, and what we thought about it. We even found people willing to listen to challenges to their basic assumptions, face to face. But with limits on what they could see on state-controlled television and self-censorship in other media, the whites in particular were extremely isolated from the realities of black life in the townships. And as we saw in our story about Mtutu Matshoba, whites and blacks rarely, if ever, sit down and talk honestly together. Better communications may not put out the fires that are raging all over South Africa, but if apartheid's people could get to know each other as we got to know them, it might go a long way towards lowering the temperature. I'm Charlene Hunter Galt.